Mexico City, December 12th, 1531. A peasant climbs a barren rock hillside in freezing weather and finds an explosion of Castilian roses in full bloom on a hill where nothing should grow. He gathers them into his cactus fiber cloak and carries them to the bishop's palace. When he opens the cloak, the bishop falls to his knees. And for the next 500 years, no one will be able to explain what is on the inside of it. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. So for those of you who watch this channel on the regular, you've heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's important. It's not my intention to ruffle any feathers with this topic. Like any other strange and mysterious topic on this channel, my only goal is to shed light on the weirdness in the world. So whatever side of the fence you're on, just be nice to each other down in the comments. Now, we need to set the stage because this story doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It drops into the middle of one of the most brutal chapters in the history of the Western Hemisphere. It's the early 1500s. Hernán Cortés has just done the unthinkable. In barely 2 years, he and a coalition of native tribes who were sick of the Aztecs managed to topple one of the most powerful empires in the Americas. The Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, a city that rivaled anything in Europe at the time, is demolished. The Spaniards are literally building Mexico City on top of its ruins, using stones from Aztec temples as building materials. And in case you need a little refresher on the Aztecs, they were a civilization that believed the universe was constantly on the verge of ending, that the sun itself needed to be fed in order to keep rising. Fed with human blood and human hearts. The Flower Wars, as they called them, were battles waged by the Aztecs specifically to capture prisoners for sacrifice. Thousands of people, sometimes in a single ceremony, having their chests open on top of the Great Pyramid at Tenochtitlan. This was not a metaphor. This was a Tuesday. So Cortés shows up and the Aztec world just implodes. The temples are torn down. Their gods, as far as they can tell, have been defeated. And then they're hit with smallpox. Half the indigenous population is wiped out. Half. The elders and wise men are saying the world is ending. And honestly, from their perspective, it kind of is. And for those who survive that, what's left is, shall we say, suboptimal. Their conquerors aren't exactly rolling out the welcome wagon. The Spanish colonists subjected them to widespread enslavement and cruelty that shocked even some of the Spaniards themselves. On the Spanish side, things aren't a bed of roses either. Corrupt officials are enslaving and murdering the native people. The missionaries are failing miserably at conversion to Christianity. In over a decade of trying, they've barely made a dent. The bishop-elect of Mexico City, Juan de Zumárraga, is outraged by the abuses and tries to stop them. He even goes so far as to excommunicate them from the church. But in return, his priests are dragged out of their churches, his communications back to the crown are censored, and his life is threatened. At one point, he orders every priest to strip the altars and vacate the city in protest. He writes a letter that essentially says, if God does not intervene with his own hand, this land is lost. The indigenous world is ending. The missionary effort is failing. The bishop is begging God for a miracle. And into this catastrophe walks a 57-year-old indigenous convert named Juan Diego. It's Saturday, December 9th, 1531. Juan Diego has left his village and is walking about 9 miles to attend Mass with the Franciscan priests. He does this at least twice a week, on foot, not a casual Catholic. As he passes near the hill of Tepeyac, a barren, dusty hill on the outskirts of present-day Mexico City, he hears a bird singing, but not a bird he's ever heard before. Then, silence. And then he hears a soft voice calling him by his nickname, Juanito, Juan Dieguito. He climbs the hill and finds a young woman surrounded by brilliant light. She speaks to him in Nahuatl, his native language. Not Spanish, not Latin. She tells him she is the Virgin Mary, mother of the one true God, and asks him to go to the bishop and request a church be built on this hill, a place where she can show her love and compassion to the people, hear their cries, and heal their suffering. Juan Diego considers himself a nobody. He describes himself as the smallest, the last, the least important person in his village. He's a humble man who does not think of himself as someone who walks into the bishop's palace and starts making demands. But he goes anyway. And it goes about as well as you'd expect. He waits for hours before a servant even lets him through the door. The bishop, who doesn't speak Nahuatl and needs a translator, listens for about 5 minutes, gives him a polite brush off, and sends him on his way. Juan Diego returns to the hill, tells the lady that's a big negatory, and suggests that maybe she should send someone more important, someone the bishop will actually listen to. But Mary says, "It is absolutely necessary that it be you." So Juan goes back again the next day. The bishop thinks, well, maybe I should at least give this guy the time of day since he actually bothered to come back again. He listens longer this time, asks a few questions, seems half convinced, but says he needs a sign, some proof that this is real. But before Juan can even do anything with that response, his uncle, Juan Bernardino, gets really sick, like deathly sick. On December 12th, Juan Diego sets out to find a priest who can give his uncle the last rites. He tries to avoid the hill entirely because he's got bigger problems right now. His uncle is dying. But the lady intercepts him anyway. And the first thing she says to him before he can even explain is essentially, "Am I not here? Am I not your mother? Don't be troubled. Your uncle is already healed." At that same exact moment, she appears separately to Juan Bernardino in his home and cures him. It is during this appearance to Uncle Juan that she gives her full title. She calls herself the Perfect and Ever Virgin, Holy Mary of Guadalupe. She tells Juan Diego to climb the hill and gather flowers, which is odd because it's December. Not only is it freezing, but that hill is just a barren rock. Nothing grows there. But Juan does as he's told and climbs the hill. At the top, he finds an explosion of Castilian roses in full bloom. Flowers that have absolutely no business being on that hill, in that climate, in that season. He picks all the flowers and makes a kind of basket out of his tilma, which is kind of like a poncho that's knotted at the neck and then wrapped around your body, made from agave fiber, which is a type of cactus. The lady arranges the flowers in the tilma and tells Juan to take them to the bishop. Do not open the tilma for anyone but him. Juan arrives at the bishop's palace for the third time. He tells the whole story, the healing, the flowers, and then he opens his tilma. The roses cascade to the floor, but the bishop doesn't even look at the flowers. He falls to his knees because there, on the inside of Juan Diego's rough cactus fiber poncho, is a full-color, luminous image of the Virgin Mary. The bishop is convinced. He keeps Juan's cloak, and within 15 days, the first chapel is built at Tepeyac. And within 7 years, somewhere between 8 and 9 million indigenous people convert to Christianity. 9 million in 7 years. On some days, missionaries had to baptize 14,000 people before sundown because the lines were just that long. It was the largest mass conversion in the history of the Catholic Church. And it happened not because of armies or politics, but because of a story from a man who considered himself the least important person alive. Today, the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe is the most visited Catholic shrine in the world. Between 20 and 30 million pilgrims visit every year, and the tilma is still there, almost 500 years later, still intact, still vibrant, and still unexplainable. Because whatever you believe about the story itself, the tilma itself is a genuinely strange artifact. And the claims surrounding it are numerous, and in some cases, legitimately pretty hard to dismiss. The tilma, which is about 3.5 feet wide by 5.5 feet long, is made from ayate fibers, which come from the maguey cactus, a type of agave, and is rough, kind of like burlap. This is a material that fiber experts describe as extremely fragile, highly susceptible to humidity, insect attack, and general decomposition. Under normal conditions, anything made from these fibers would last 20 years, maybe 40 if you're generous and keep it in ideal conditions. This one has lasted almost 5 centuries, and for the first 116 years, it had zero protection, no glass case, no climate control. It hung in a small chapel exposed to the humid, salty air of the Mexico City basin, where floodwaters were known to rise all the way up to the altar. Now, just in case you're thinking, Mexico City isn't anywhere near the coast. It doesn't have salty air. Well, that's what I thought too, but we are wrong. Much of the modern Mexico City was once under Lake Texcoco, which was salty. So there are lots of salt deposits in the soil, leading to salt in the air as well. But the environment is not the only thing working against the tilma. Pilgrims touched it, kissed it, rubbed rosaries and religious images against it. Candle smoke and soot bathed it constantly for over a century, while tens of thousands of flames poured heat and infrared radiation onto the unprotected fabric for over a century. A high-quality copy made in 1789 on similar material was falling apart within 8 years and had to be discarded entirely within 15. The original is still there, looking like it was made last week. And here's another detail that's kind of interesting. The tilma is actually 2 separate pieces of fabric sewn together with a visible seam running vertically down the middle. The back of the cloth is coarse and rough, exactly what you'd expect from maguey agave weave. But the front, the image side, has been described by examiners as having an almost silky smoothness, a texture that doesn't match the rear at all. Nobody's been able to explain why the 2 sides of the same fabric feel so fundamentally different. When the image is examined under magnification, there are no detectable brushstrokes from any known painting technique. The color appears to be impregnated directly into the fibers themselves, not sitting on top of them like paint would. There's no preparatory sketch, no base coat, no varnish, no protective layer of any kind. Biophysicist Philip Callahan, a painting expert from the University of Florida, examined the tilma using infrared photography in 1979 and found that significant portions of the original image had no explanation in terms of any known artistic method. So far, his is the only formally published scientific examination of the tilma. Nobel Prize-winning chemist Richard Kuhn reportedly analyzed fiber samples in 1936 and concluded the colorants were not animal, mineral, or vegetable in origin. If you remove those 3 categories from everything that makes up our planet, there's not much left. The image isn't just on the front of the tilma. It also appears on the back, like it was imprinted simultaneously through the entire thickness of the fabric. A medallion at the Virgin's neck is visible from the reverse side. If an artist had painted this, they would have most likely painted the medallion first and then painted the cross over the top, which means from the back, you would see either a blank back or irregular bleed through. Instead, what you see suggests the image was formed all at once through the fabric, not applied to its surface. And any painter will tell you that if you try to apply pigment to raw, unprimed fabric, the color runs. It bleeds along the fibers. It doesn't stay where you put it. The tilma has no sizing, no gesso, no preparation of any kind, and yet the colors are precise. And the natural irregularities of the fiber itself seem to contribute to the 3-dimensional quality of the features, like the image was designed around the imperfections of the cloth rather than painted over them. For example, a small knot in the weave falls exactly where it gives volume to the lip. And that's not the only time it happens. According to Philip Callahan, planning an image around such imperfections so that it would accentuate the design would have been pretty hard to do. Now, Here's something really important that both sides of this debate agree on. Human artists added elements to the image over the centuries. A crown on the head, gold on the sun rays, silver on the moon, and maybe even the angel at the feet. And every single one of those additions shows telltale signs of conventional painting. Visible brushstrokes, sizing and primer on the cloth, crackling, fading. The crown's completely gone. The gold on the sun rays has faded. The silver on the moon has worn away. But the original image underneath, the face, the hands, the robe, and the mantle, hasn't budged. The parts clearly painted by human hands behave exactly as old paint should behave over 5 centuries, but the core original image does not. Now, here's one that I didn't see coming. When the image is viewed or photographed from different distances, the color shifts. Close up, the face looks kind of flat and pinkish gray. But from several feet away, it takes on a warmer olive or greenish gray tone. This optical shift creates a subtle iridescent-like effect, like how colors shift on butterfly wings or beetle shells, where the color changes depending on the angle you're looking at it. Now, we've had iridescent and pearlescent paints for decades, but artists and researchers have struggled to match the image's luminosity, seamless blending, and lack of visible brushstrokes on the same coarse, unsized agave fiber. The rough, uneven surface simply doesn't cooperate with conventional painting techniques, even using the finest modern brushes. And when photographs were taken in dim lighting without a flash, the resulting images were overexposed with brighter colors than expected. In low light, photos should be darker, not brighter. That's basic photography. Some scientists have concluded the image itself appears to emanate light, which is, to put it mildly, not a thing that paintings do. Now, if all that stuff wasn't amazing enough, buckle up. This next part will blow your mind. In 1929, photographer Alfonso Marque Gonzalez noticed what appeared to be the reflection of a person in the Virgin's eyes while enlarging negatives. Nobody paid much attention. Then in 1951, Carlos Salinas Chavez found the same person using a high magnification lens, this time in both eyes, but positioned slightly differently, exactly as a real reflection would appear in 2 separate human eyes. Now, people started paying attention. Over the following decades, more than 10 ophthalmologists examined the eyes. They confirmed the reflected figures. But then they discovered something far more significant. The reflections conform to the Purkinje-Sanson law, an optical principle not even discovered until the 1830s, 300 years after the tilma appeared. This law states that a living eye produces 3 distinct reflections, one on the cornea surface, one behind the lens, and a third inverted image between the first 2. All 3 were found in each of the Virgin's eyes. These triple reflections have never been observed on any flat surface in the history of ophthalmology. Not paintings, not photographs, only in living eyes with actual depth, a real cornea, and a real lens. When examined with an ophthalmoscope, the instrument eye doctors use to look inside your eye, the results were stunning. When they looked through the scope, the image they saw gave the visual impression of depth and dimensionality, consistent with a real eye, rather than the flat, dead appearance you'd expect from paint on fabric. Multiple ophthalmologists tested oil paintings, watercolors, and photographs with the same instrument. None produced any reflection whatsoever. Only the eyes of this image responded like living tissue. And this wasn't one doctor having a moment. It was confirmed independently by more than 10 specialists over several decades. Dr. Jose Aste Tonsman, a Peruvian imaging expert, spent over 20 years studying the tilma. Using digital enlargements up to 2,500 times, he identified 13 separate figures reflected in both eyes, positioned according to the laws of optics with appropriate distortion for the curvature of a human cornea. The detail is staggering. One figure appears to have an earring measuring 1/100th of a millimeter. A sandal strap was measured at 12/100ths of a millimeter. Another figure, an old man with pronounced baldness, a large straight nose, gaunt cheeks, and a white beard, closely matches 18th century depictions of Bishop Zumarraga. There's even a reflected black woman, which aligns with historical records showing Zumarraga freed an enslaved black woman named Marie who was in his service. The boarding documents from his voyage from Spain to Mexico have been found and confirm the presence of a black slave among his party. And one of the reflected figures appears to be a family group. A woman, a man, and children, as if an indigenous family was present in the room when the tilma was opened. And there's one more detail I saved. When researchers placed a stethoscope over the area of the black sash on the image, the area that in Aztec symbolism indicates pregnancy, they reportedly detected a rhythmic pulsing at a rate of about 115 beats per minute. That's the normal heart rate of an unborn child. The blue-green mantle that Mary is wearing has 46 stars, 23 on each side, but they are not randomly placed. Starting in 1980, astronomer Hernández Illescas and other researchers compared their arrangement to astronomical maps and discovered that they correspond to the major constellations visible in the sky over Mexico City at approximately 10:40 in the morning on December 12th, 1531, the exact date and time of the reported apparition. But they're not positioned the same way that we would see them in the sky. They're reversed, like you're looking at them from outside the universe looking inward. When scientists first mapped them, they noticed a slight distortion. Illescas had the idea to use a concave mirror, and everything clicked. The distortion was consistent with projecting a sphere onto a flat surface, the same warping you see on world maps near the poles. With this correction, the correlation exceeded 90%. Some of the constellations you should have been able to see but can't because they land behind Mary's body are pretty interesting. Leo, the lion, is over her womb, and Leo's main star is called Regulus, which means little king, the Christ child. Corona Borealis, or the northern crown, sits right over her forehead, as if to say she is the queen of the sky. Virgo, the virgin, is over her pure heart. Gemini, or the twins, is over her knees or lap, often called the seat of wisdom. And Orion, the hunter, is over the angel below, which has led some to speculate that maybe the angel represents the great warrior prince of the heavenly host, Saint Michael. Researchers checked over 150 other paintings of the Virgin Mary with stars. Not one matched any constellation. And the date itself, December 12th, 1531, doesn't sound like anything special. But because of the Julian calendar that was used at the time was a little hinky, that day was actually the winter solstice, the precise moment of the arrival of the new sun that the Aztecs had been eagerly awaiting. 9 specific flowers on the Virgin's robe, identified by experts in Aztec pictograms as tepital flowers, meaning mountain, correspond to the locations of major volcanic peaks and mountain ranges across Mexico when overlaid on a topographic map. The central flower, a 4-petaled Nahui Oyin, representing the 4 directions of the Aztec universe, aligns with the Hill of the Star, where the Aztecs celebrated their most sacred ceremony, the New Fire Festival, held once every 52 years. The other flowers map to the Popocatépetl volcano, the second highest in Mexico, the Malinche volcano, the Colima volcano, and others. 8 of the 9 flowers correspond precisely. The map is oriented with east upward, toward the head of the Virgin, because east was the most important cardinal point for the Aztecs, who always looked toward the rising sun. This one is almost too strange to believe. Mathematician Fernando Ojeda Llanes and researcher Alberto Aguilar Poteo discovered that when the tilma is divided into 46 equidistant lines, matching the number of stars, the stars and flowers land on them like notes on a musical score. When the horizontal distances between symbols establish tones and rhythms, the result is not noise. It's a coherent, harmonious melody. Try placing random notes on a score and see if you get anything that doesn't sound like a cat walking on a piano. It's nearly impossible to achieve beautiful harmony by chance. And yet there it is. A song hidden in a painting that might not be a painting on a fabric that shouldn't still exist. Now, while the raw output of the notes on the staffs certainly aren't going to hit the top 40, they're not unpleasant. In fact, you're listening to them now. And some musicians have actually expanded these single notes into something quite beautiful. Researchers have also noted that the key elements of the image, the face, the hands, the mantle's drape, follow the golden ratio, the mathematical proportion found throughout nature in everything from seashells to sunflowers to spiral galaxies. Whether this represents intentional design or coincidence depends entirely on where you're standing. But it's another layer on an already very thick stack. Now, this bit of tilma trivia needs a little context. In the 1910s and 1920s, Mexico went through a vicious anti-Catholic political persecution. The government under President Calles was actively trying to eliminate the church's influence. Churches were seized, priests were executed, religious services were banned. It was a brutal period that eventually ignited the Cristero War, a massive Catholic armed resistance. The tilma was seen as the most powerful Catholic symbol in the country, and the government wanted it gone. On November 14th, 1921, a man named Luciano Perez Carpio placed a bouquet of flowers containing a dynamite bomb at the foot of the tilma's altar. The explosion was catastrophic. It shattered marble steps, destroyed candlesticks and flower vases, blew out windows in the basilica and in surrounding houses over 500 feet away, and twisted a heavy brass crucifix into a mangled wreck. That crucifix is still on display today, but the tilma? Untouched. The glass in front of it didn't even crack. In 1791, while cleaning the silver frame around the image, a worker accidentally spilled a solution of 50% concentrated nitric acid directly onto the upper right corner of the tilma. Now, if you know anything about chemistry, you know that concentrated nitric acid on a fragile plant fiber canvas is game over. It should have eaten through the material like it was tissue paper. Instead, it left only a faint yellowish stain. And that stain has been slowly and inexplicably fading over the years, not getting worse like acid damage usually does. You can still see the yellowish mark if you look carefully, and you can see where the acid ran across areas of color without even affecting the pigment. Okay, obviously, this thing sounds pretty dang remarkable. But as I'm sure you've already guessed by now, there's another side to the story. There are skeptical arguments, and some of them are worth taking seriously. Some researchers have argued that the tilma may not actually be made from maguey cactus fiber at all. They suggest it could be woven from hemp, which is one of the strongest natural fibers known, or even from ordinary linen canvas material common to that era. If the tilma is hemp, then its survival for 5 centuries becomes significantly less mysterious. Not to mention that the exposure to the soot and waxy vapor of thousands of candles during the century plus that the fabric was hanging without any kind of protection could have left a waxy residue, making the front side feel softer than the back side. And if that's the case, that waxy coating would have also protected the cloth from the acid spill. Remember Philip Callahan, the guy from the University of Florida who took the infrared pictures in 1979? His own infrared photographs show what appear to be sketch lines in the folds of the robe, the kind of guidelines an artist would draw before starting to paint. Close-up photography also reveals areas, particularly on the face, where pigment has been applied thick enough to obscure the texture of the cloth. And speaking of photos, Remember those low light photographs that seem to emanate their own light? Well, not so fast. While it is true that researchers have noted that the paint is remarkably luminous for its age and certainly has some unexplainable qualities in terms of reflecting light, no studies have shown that there is any kind of internal light source making the image glow on its own. In 1982, Jose Sol Rosales, a Mexican art restoration specialist, examined the image and concluded it was a 16th century painting using specific indigenous pigments, including pine soot black, white sulfates, calcite, and a flower-based colorant for the pinkish tones. He identified the technique as consistent with the painting methods of the era. This is a direct contradiction of Richard Kuhn's fiber analysis that said the pigments were not animal, vegetable, or mineral. Now let's go back to the 13 figures that are supposed to be in Mary's eyes. They were identified by a single researcher working from photographs at extreme magnification of a rough weave fabric surface. At 2,500 times enlargement on material that coarse, the human brain is prone to pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random noise. You see faces in clouds. You see the man in the moon. Skeptics argue that's what this is, pareidolia. The findings have not been independently replicated in a peer-reviewed study. Also, there are no known 16th century written accounts of the apparition from Bishop Zumarraga himself, even though he wrote all kinds of things. The first major published account didn't appear until 1648, over a century after the events. The gap raises serious questions about whether the story was real or legend written down over time. The hill of Tepeyac was already a sacred site dedicated to the Aztec mother goddess Tonantzin before the apparition story emerged. The Franciscan friars who had custody of the chapel were strongly opposed to the Guadalupe devotion, with some of them openly denouncing it as syncretism, the blending of Aztec pagan worship with Christian imagery to make conversion more palatable. In other words, some of the very missionaries on the ground at the time thought the whole thing was manipulation. Oh, and one more thing. About that heartbeat that supposedly some researchers heard through the stethoscope, that one seems to be just totally made up. Fair points, but some of them wobble a bit when you poke them.
The weevils wobble, but they don't fall down.
So let's start back at the fabric itself. Even if you grant that the tilma is hemp rather than maguey, that only addresses the raw durability of the fabric itself. It doesn't explain why the 1789 copy on similar material fell apart in under a decade, while the original survived 116 years of completely unprotected exposure to candle smoke, floodwater, physical handling by thousands of pilgrims, and the corrosive, salty humidity of the Mexico City basin. Hemp is durable, sure, under controlled conditions, not under those conditions. And some researchers have suggested that tested samples may have come from the edge of the tilma, where it was common practice to reinforce precious images with hemp or linen borders, meaning any hemp could be a later conservation addition, not the original material. Not to mention the fact that Juan Diego, by his own admission, was not an important guy. He was just a peasant, and a peasant would not have been able to afford anything made from hemp or linen. Let's talk about the sketch marks. Philip Callahan used tentative language about those lines, something along the lines of, the marks might be sketch marks. That's not definite, and believe it or not, through the years, additions have been made to the image. Whoever thought that was a good idea? They added a crown, gold on the sun rays, and silver on the moon, and every known human addition shows both sketch lines and brush strokes and has faded or disappeared, leaving just the original image. The original image shows thick pigment in places, but no brush strokes. Thick pigment with no evidence of how it was applied is a puzzling combination for which the skeptics have no answer. Jose Rosales identified indigenous pigments, but his examination was just a visual inspection, not a full chemical analysis. His conclusions have been challenged by other scientists who point out that identifying a pigment's appearance under magnification is not the same as determining its molecular composition. You can look at something and say it looks like pine soot, but that doesn't mean it is pine soot. Additionally, Rosales' findings directly contradict Kuhn's earlier analysis. Either the colorants are identifiable indigenous pigments, or there's something that doesn't fit any known category. Both can't be right. And the skeptical side generally doesn't address the question of how those pigments, whatever they are, were applied to unprimed fabric without brushstrokes and without running along the fibers. That's the question that keeps coming back, no matter what side you're on. As far as the shapes reflected in Mary's eyes, pareidolia certainly sounds reasonable on the surface. But Tonsman's claim is not simply, I see shapes in rough fabric. His argument is that the distortion and placement of the reflected figures follow the precise optical behavior of a curved human cornea, specifically the triple reflections of the Purkinje-Sanson effect at a scale of 1/100th of a millimeter. If a forger painted the image, they would have needed knowledge of optical laws that wouldn't be discovered for 300 years, and the technical ability to execute details smaller than a human hair on coarse agave fiber. The counter-argument is fair. It hasn't been independently replicated, but access to the tilma for scientific study has been extremely restricted since the 1980s. You can't replicate a study you're not allowed to conduct. And the ophthalmoscope findings, the iris reacting to light and producing reflections on a flat, opaque surface, were confirmed by more than 10 separate specialists over several decades. That's not one researcher seeing patterns. That's a consensus among eye doctors about the behavior of these eyes. Now, let's go back to the lack of contemporary documentation. Zumarraga's Franciscan order was institutionally opposed to the devotion. They saw it as dangerously close to paganism. So the absence of enthusiastic records from an organization actively trying to suppress something doesn't prove nothing happened. It might just mean that they didn't want to talk about it. Beyond that, huge amounts of documentation from that period were lost or destroyed. Between the conquest itself, the subsequent upheavals, and simple neglect over centuries, the documentary record of early colonial Mexico is riddled with gaps on subjects far less controversial than this one. But we still have over 100 archival documents from before 1700 referencing the apparition. The oldest date is 1537, just 6 years after the event, and bears Zumarraga's own signature. The Codex Escalada from 1548 contains an authenticated drawing of the apparition scene with the confirmed signature of Fray Bernardino de Sahagún, one of the most important chroniclers of Aztec culture. The Nakin Mopoa, the primary written account of the event, was written in Nahuatl by the indigenous scholar Antonio Valeriano, who would have had access to living witnesses. And the 8 to 9 million conversions in 7 years are historically attested. That is a fact that nobody disputes. Something catalyzed that transformation, and the conventional missionary efforts before 1531 had been failing spectacularly. How about the idea that the image of Mary is just a copy of the Aztec goddess Tonantzin? That's an understandable take, but it's so much more than that. It's a systemic dismantling of the Aztec religious framework, communicated in symbols the indigenous people could read like a book. The entire image functions as a codex, a pictorial text meant to be read from multiple angles. When you read it as the Aztecs would have, the message is devastating. The blue-green mantle? That specific shade of turquoise blue-green was reserved exclusively for the divine. Only an emperor could wear it. She outranks their emperor. The black sash tied above her waist? In Aztec culture, that was the unmistakable sign of a woman with child. She's pregnant. The four-petaled flower over her womb positioned in an X, that was the Nahui Oyin, the most sacred symbol in the Aztec universe, representing the center of all creation, the presence of God himself. She is carrying God inside her. Her hair is down, unpinned and unbraided, which in their culture signified virginity. A pregnant virgin carrying God. That would have hit the Aztec mind like Thor's hammer. But it gets even bigger. She stands on the crescent moon, which represented one of their most fearsome deities. And she's eclipsing the sun behind her, the very god they had been feeding with human blood for centuries. She's not just above these gods, she's standing on them, blocking them out. The entire image is delivering a single, unmistakable message. The God I carry is greater than all of your gods. No more sacrifices, no more blood. My son's sacrifice is the only one that matters. The fact that this message was delivered in their language, their symbolism, at their sacred site to one of their own people, that's not trickery. That's communication. And perhaps nothing proves the depth of the transformation better than what happened in 1544, when Mexico experienced one of the worst droughts in its history. Before Guadalupe, the Aztec response to drought was, let's sacrifice some more people, specifically children, offered to Tlaloc, the rain god. That was the answer. Let's kill all the kids and maybe we'll get some rain. In 1544, 13 years after the apparition, Mexico again was in a really bad drought. But the response this time was a little different. Instead of, let's do away with our next generation party, there was a massive pilgrimage of children to the shrine of Guadalupe. Not to be killed, to pray, to ask for mercy. From a culture of death to a culture of life in barely more than a decade. That's not syncretism. That's a revolution. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. That's never been my job. My job is to lay out the strange, the mysterious, and the unexplainable, and let you wrestle with it yourself. But I will say this. The skeptical arguments tend to address individual claims in isolation. The fiber might be hemp. The brushstrokes might be later additions. The eye reflections might be pareidolia. The Rosales study says it's paint. Each one, taken alone, has a could-be answer, but the aggregate picture is a different animal entirely. No brushstrokes, an image that passes through both sides of the fabric. Extraordinary preservation under hostile conditions. Survival of a bombing and an acid spill. Every human edition fading while the original endures. Eyes that react to an ophthalmoscope and conform to optical laws not discovered for 3 more centuries. A star map matching the exact sky on the exact date. A mountain map hidden in the flowers. A musical score embedded in the position of the stars and flowers. Colors that shift with distance. Proportions that follow the golden ratio. You can explain away one of these claims, maybe 2, but all of them at once on a single piece of cactus fiber woven in 1531? Whatever this thing is, it's not ordinary. And the more technology advances, the more surprises it reveals. The constellations weren't found until we had astronomical software. The eye reflections required digital magnification. The mountain map needed modern topographic data. It's as though this fabric was designed to reveal itself slowly, one layer at a time, as we developed the tools to see what was always there. A time bomb of mysteries. And the fuse is still burning. Now, after all of this, if you think I've made a good case for the tilma being the real deal, then the next question is, who made it? Is it a genuine miracle from God? Or did it come from someplace a little warmer with the intention of leading the faithful astray? That, I think, is the more important question. Some people say the tilma is absolutely miraculous proof of the existence of God. Others will say it is the devil in disguise. I honestly don't know who's right in that debate. So it's up to you to decide for yourself. What I will say is that we are supposed to love our neighbor. So I will say it again. Everyone be nice in the comments. And if you've made it this far, you're my kind of people. And my kind of people are going to love this episode right here. Click on it. You're welcome. Be careful out there. And I will see you here again on the In-Between.